Hey, welcome. Today, we're diving into one of the biggest, oldest questions in all of theology, predestination. We're going to see if we can unpack this classic puzzle, and we'll be using the unique framework laid out in the writings of Reverend Sun Myung to do it. So let's jump right in. So, let's just start with the big one, the question that's been bugging people for literally centuries. Is your life already mapped out for you? Is your fate set in stone? Or is free will real? And do the choices you make actually truly matter? The reason this is such a tough nut to crack is because the Bible itself seems to point in two completely different directions. On the one hand, you've got verses that make it sound like God has total control, like a potter shaping clay. But then, on the other hand, you have all these verses telling us to do something, to ask, to seek, to believe. And this contradiction, well, it's fueled a whole lot of debate. So yeah, that leads us right into our first section, framing this whole thing for what it is, a major biblical contradiction. And this is where it gets really sticky, right? I mean, if everything is absolutely predestined by God, then why would Jesus even bother telling us to ask or seek? Why pray? Why try to live a good life or do acts of charity? If our fate is already sealed, all of that effort, it kind of feels pointless, doesn't it? So how do we even start to unravel this knot? Well, the source material we're looking at today offers a really interesting solution. And it starts by defining something it calls an absolute will. To really get this argument, we first have to be clear on what we mean by God's will. We're not talking about God micromanaging every little thing that happens. We're talking about the ultimate, big picture goal, the complete and successful fulfillment of the original purpose of creation. Okay, and this right here, this is the key that starts to unlock the whole puzzle. The source makes this super important distinction. The end goal, the will itself, that is absolute. It's not going to change. But how and when we get there, the fulfillment of that will, that part is conditional. It actually depends on us. And you see the absolute part of the will backed up in Scripture, like here in Isaiah. The whole idea is that God's ultimate purpose is, well, it's non-negotiable. The final destination is locked in, and sooner or later, one way or another, it will happen. And you can see this pattern play out all over the place in the Bible. When Adam's mission didn't succeed, the will didn't just stop. No, Jesus came as a second Adam to continue it. When Moses couldn't enter the promised land, Joshua stepped up. The plan itself, that absolute will for restoration, it keeps going, even when the people chosen to carry it out fall short. Okay, so that brings us to what might be the most powerful, memorable idea in this whole explanation. It's the part that quantifies our role in this whole thing, humanity's 5% responsibility. So the way this is explained is that in this divine plan, God takes care of the lion's share of the work, all the grace, the power, the setup. That's the 95%. But there's this small, crucial sliver left for human beings to fulfill on our own. Now, here's the kicker. Even though our part is just 5% of the total cosmic picture, for us, that little 5%, that's our 100%. We have to give it everything we've got. It's like the tiny little key that unlocks a massive door. It is the one crucial, deciding factor that determines whether God's will can actually be accomplished through us. And believe me, the cost of dropping the ball on that 5% is huge. The source points to these examples as moments where humanity failed its part. Adam and Eve's choice, Moses' flash of anger, Judas's betrayal. These actions had massive history-altering consequences. It just goes to show you how absolutely vital that tiny human portion of responsibility really is. All right, so now that we have this framework, this idea of an absolute will being fulfilled through a 95-5 partnership, let's go back to those tricky verses from the beginning and see if they make more sense now. Okay, remember this one from Romans? Those whom he predestined, he also called, justified, glorified. I mean, it sounds about as absolute as you can get. It sounds like a done deal from start to finish. But if we look at it through this new lens, the meaning totally shifts. So, yes, God predestines someone for a specific role or calling. That's God's 95%. But whether they're actually justified and glorified in the end, well, that hinges on them answering that call and fulfilling their 5% part. Okay, what about the potter and the clay? I mean, that one sounds like a slam dunk for absolute predestination, right? God can just make us into whatever he wants. Well, according to this perspective, that verse isn't talking about God just deciding fates from scratch with perfect material. It's actually describing humanity's condition after the fall. Because we failed our responsibility, we became like broken, useless clay. So from that fallen position, we don't really have the right to complain about whatever methods God needs to use to try and fix us and make us useful again. All right, now for the really tough one. Jacob and Esau. God loved one and hated the other before they were even born. I mean, how can that be anything other than arbitrary, absolute predestination? The explanation here is that this wasn't about God condemning one soul and saving another from the get-go. It was about casting them in specific roles to try and fix an old problem, the failure of Cain and Abel. Jacob was put in the Abel position and Esau in the Cain position. The final outcome still depended on their choices. And in the end, Esau actually did fulfill his 5% by submitting to Jacob, and because of that, he earned a huge blessing himself. Okay, so let's tie all of this together and look at the big picture here in our final section, a divine partnership. And really, this is what it all boils down to. According to this explanation, predestination isn't about God being a puppet master. It's about an absolute, guaranteed final destination, the complete restoration of creation. But the journey to get there, that's a partnership. It's a team effort that literally cannot succeed unless human beings freely choose to step up and fulfill their small but absolutely essential part. And that just leaves us with one final thing to think about. If the fulfillment of this grand, divine plan is truly a partnership and not a dictatorship, what does that say about the incredible potential and the profound responsibility that's sitting inside of every single one of us?